Chapter 8, Guinevere, CRT 8-1. Maeva, one-time wife of Dadam, found refuge among people of Artis, where she gave birth to Guinevere, the cuckoo child. But as the child grew, it was seen that she had red hair. Though all knew there were fair-haired and dark-haired people, none had ever seen anyone with red hair. Also, strange maladies had manifested in Artis, for which the strangers were blamed. Therefore, because of these things, Maeva and her child were driven out. CRT 8-2. They came to a pool near the border of Caucasus, and built a habitation of reeds, living there for many years. However, Maeva was killed by a wild beast, and Guinevere was left alone. But she learned much from familiars who came to her, and so she became a sorceress. CRT 8-3. Time went by, and the halflings, called yoslings, began to gather around her habitation, and they thought she was a goddess and worshipped her. As her fame spread, word came to Herthu concerning the strange woman. So he sent men to find out about her and report. Guinevere knew about Herthu, but he did not know who she was, or that any child of Maeva lived. When Herthu heard the report, he was intrigued, and sent men to escort her to him, and she came at his request. They brought her into his presence, wearing a cloak of feathers and a garment of doeskin, her hair unbraided like that of other women, falling outside the cloak almost to her knees. He was amazed at the cascade of red hair, and his heart was stirred by her beauty. Herthu gave Guinevere a bower and attendants, but she preferred to be attended by yoslings, whom the people about Herthu despised. They gossiped about the strange woman, for it was seen that yosling men freely entered her bower. Yet her bearing was modest and maidenly. The yoslings showed her every form of respect. CRT 8-5. It was the season of fruitfulness, and when Herthu went to the gathering place, he took Guinevere with him. But the yoslings could not be taken there, so they remained behind. But the people removed them. When they arrived at the gathering place, and Gwydon saw Guinevere, he was startled, for he had seen such a woman in the darkened waters. But he welcomed her, and was surprised at her wisdom and skill at sorcery. When the time came for Gwydon to prophesy, and all who came to hear him were gathered about, they became apprehensive, for his coming forth was delayed, and the moon began to disappear, eaten away by the blackness of the night. Then, when they started to jostle and flee, there was a great shout, and Gwydon appeared. As he did, a great fire sprang up on either side of him. The people remained, for each was rooted to the place where he stood. CRT 8-6. Gwydon spoke at length, telling them that the night sky sign heralded a new era, that as the moon grew again in brightness, so should their race wax strong and virile, spreading wide across the face of the earth, driving lesser races before them, that a son of Herthu would lead their sons out of Caucasus, and his sons and their sons would continue westwardly towards Hesperus, meaning land of spirits, that there they would meet their final destiny. He told them that there would be a great bloodletting, when brother would fight with brother and father with son, but that this would be the planting of the center pole, around which the framework for the structure of their race would be woven. He said, "I shall go before the vanguard in spirit." CRT 8-7. Later, Herthu asked Gwydon to cast the almond sticks and read the ashes, as he wished to know things concerning Guinevere. This Gwydon did, telling him that she was his fate mate, one destined to be his wife, that she was indeed a true maiden, and he would not be forbidden. He said she acts as she does through innocence, and not through brashness. But what Gwydon told Herthu was no more than a grain in the grain sack among all that which he knew and saw. CRT 8-8. When Herthu returned to his home site, he paid court to Guinevere and asked her to marry him, and this she consented to do after 1 year. The people, hearing what was intended, was displeased and murmured against the marriage, saying it was unseemly for their king to marry a sorceress, and one strange in so many ways. Also, there was a custom forbidding the intermingling of blood, but there was no doubt as to what she was, some thinking she was one who could be acceptable. CRT 8-9. Guinevere was not the bloodkin of Herthu, so as the marriage would not be incestuous, Guinevere decided she would say nothing of their relationship, for she was in love with him, and love is ever ready to make excuses. Yet, despite her knowledge and wisdom, her heart was full of fears because of her background. But she displayed none of her anxieties. She did not feel at ease among the people, but never asked that the yoslings be allowed back. She tried to become acceptable by ministering to the sick with simples and remedies. But the more she cured and healed, the more people feared her, and fearing they shunned her, except they were in dire need of her help. CRT 8-10. However, Herthu remained firm in his resolve to marry, though many advised that if he simply took Guinevere as a concubine, or as something less than a wife, it would be more acceptable. They said none would object if she were treated as a woman with no standing. Mate, but do not marry, for marriage would grant her undue status. And is marriage so necessary? Does a wise man buy the pie, whereof he can freely eat at any time? CRT 8-11. Such sayings enraged Herthu, for he knew Guinevere to be a woman reserved for marriage, and this he tried to tell the people. But they laughed, saying, "She has bewitched you. Put her to the test." But he replied, "This is unworthy, for it displays doubt and distrust. A virgin is a virgin, whether named so by horn or wand, and remains so whatever the conjectures of carnal-minded men who are more familiar with women of lesser repute. Yet, whether the marriage bar applied was still a thing of doubt in the minds of many, for none knew the lineage of Guinevere, nor did she enlighten anyone, though it was customary to recite this at the betrothal. But Herthu and Guinevere remained unbetrothed, though the forthcoming marriage was made known. CRT 8-12. Now the nephews and kin of Idelvar nurtured seeds of discord among the people, and because it was a time of peace, when the skills of a war chief were not needed, many heeded their words, so it developed that there were those for Herthu and those against him. Then Herthu said to the people, "Let this not be something to cut people apart, but something which can be decided at the next folk feast." CRT 8-13. The seed-sowing time had passed, but it was not yet harvest-tide, and the young men held spear-throwing contests and tested each other in many manly skills. At such times, seated on a platform against the palisade, Herthu gave judgment and awarded merits. Inside the palisade was a walkway and places from which great stones could be hurled, and from one such place came a murderous weapon which cut down through Herthu's head to pierce the shoulder of his shield arm, striking him to the ground immediately. There was a great tumult and confusion. Fighting broke out and men died, but Herthu was carried to safety in the bower of Guinevere. There he was protected by his retainers, but within the palisade all was taken over by those hostile to Herthu. CRT 8-14. Before the cowardly blow, those for Herthu had been more numerous and powerful, but after he was so sorely wounded, they were less, and of these many were inclined to waver, for such is the nature of men. But to contrast with the frail reeds who wavered, Those who remain loyal will resolute, for this too is the nature of man. CRT 815. Now when Guinevere and the wise men attended to Herthu, they saw that while the shield arm had been injured, it was not unfeeling, for it grasped the hand of Guinevere. But this the sword arm could not do, though it was uninjured. Therefore, they knew the slaughter-bent weapon had been charmed, and no woman could remove such enchantment, nor could the wise men, for they were unblooded. In the days that followed, the enchantment caused demons to enter through the wound and take up their abode. So Herthu was tormented, and his body racked before subsiding into the quietness which precedes death. The demons had abused Guinevere, called her foul names, and cried out in loud voices against people, so that they should abandon their king. CRT 816. The place where Herthu lay was near the lakeside, and in the lake was an island called Inscris, meaning Isle of the Dead, where those about to die were taken as well as the dead before being consigned to the waters. For the people believed that those given into the lake went straight into awareness in the other world, while anyone buried on land was only half aware upon arrival and remained half awake and half asleep for many years. So those loyal to Herthu carried him down to the boats, and accompanied him and Guinevere to the isle, and they were not molested, for none interfere with those mourning the dead. On the isle were priests and 9 holy maidens who attended to their rites, while other women ministered to the newly dead. But Herthu was not dead, though halfway across the threshold. CRT 817. When Herthu arrived, he was placed in the hospice house, where Guinevere attended to him. Gwydden opened Herthu's skull, where it had been cleft, and let out the demon which had taken up habitation there. And he brewed powerful potions which removed the enchantment. When after many days he departed, Herthu was no longer at the door of death, though weak and in many ways like a baby. CRT 818. While Herthu lay so sorely stricken, the kinsfolk of Idelvar were disputing among themselves, and this led to fighting in battles. But none came near the isle to harm Herthu, because it was a sacred place, and gave him sanctuary. When it came to the time of the folk feast, there was a great battle at the gathering place, and Gwydden was slain. There came a day when Herthu, though still not whole, could move about, and then he and Guinevere departed, with those who remained with them. They were married before leaving their Isle of Sanctuary. CRT 819. They fled to a place afar off where, as the years went by, Herthu became whole again, and Guinevere gave birth to sons and daughters. It was a good place, fertile and well-watered, and so they prospered. But there came a time of drought, when the waters dried up and their flocks died. So Herthu sent men to Caucasus, and these came back, saying that there too the land was stricken, and the people distressed. He also sent others to the west, and they returned, saying that there the land was not stricken, but the people would not accept them except with spears. CRT 820. Herthu then sent men back to Caucasus to tell the people there of the plenty, which lay to the west, and they came back with a war band led by Achilles, and many people followed. Herthu could no longer bear weapons, and his sons were as yet young and unblooded. Therefore he gave his 2 sons, who were of sufficient age, into the keeping of Achilles, so they might learn the art of war, and they followed him loyally, becoming men of valor in the conflict which ensued. Many people left Caucasus and settled in the land lying to the west, and Herthu and Guinevere also settled there. CRT 821. Time passed, and Herthu became renowned for his wisdom, and Achilles, king of Arani, honored him with lands and servants. Herthu's two sons, who had followed the king and were twins, married the king's two eldest daughters, who were also twins. This caused problems for the king, though having three wives was sonless. Therefore, the twin sons of Herthu became his heirs. The king was perplexed, for the two men could not rule together, and both were of equal standing in his eyes. Yet it was the king's duty to nominate his heir and proclaim him to the people, so there should be no division after his death. Therefore, Athilus consulted Herthu as to how the judgment should be made, and Herthu said, "Let fate decree who should be king." CRT 822. In Arani, the people gathered 4 times a year for the folk feast. At such times it was customary for new laws to be proclaimed, judgments given, and all contentious issues settled. So, before the next folk feast, Herthu prepared a man-made stone from sand, clay, and other things, and while it was still soft, he set the hilt of his great sword, Dislana the bitter biter, into it. And when the stone was hardened, Dislana was fast. The sword implanted stone was then set down near the place where the king gave judgment. Around it was drawn a wide circle, bisected across. CRT 823. On the day when the people were first assembled to hear his words, Athilus told them of his perplexity over the problem concerning the twin sons of Herthu and his daughters. He said, "So the people are not divided, and the kingdoms rent by strife. It is well this matter be settled now. Therefore, I am setting a fair test involving no man other than these two, whom I hold equally dear. Whichsoever of them shall remove their father's great weapon from this stone, so he frees it and grasps the hilt, shall become my lawful heir, with the other being to him as a younger brother. They will each try in turn during the duration of the fall of a feather, the first trier being he who cast his bracelet over the blade. Then each of Herthu's sons was placed in a spot where the bisecting line joined the circle, so they stood opposite each other, and each had 3 bracelets. They threw until one encircled the blade with his bracelet." CRT 824. Then this one tried to withdraw the weapon with his hand, but could not because of the sharpness. The other tried by placing his 2 palms on each side of the blade, then pressing them together while lifting, but he could not move it either. The first one tried again, copying what had just been done, more powerfully, so the stone almost lifted off the ground. But the sword did not leave the stone. Then the other approached the stone, but this time he put his hands under the edges of the stone, so he could lift it in his arms, and he dashed it down over a rock, which was nearby, so it broke asunder. He then picked Dislana up by the hilt and brandished it over his head. The people acclaimed him, while his brother grasped his arms in congratulation. Thus, by wisdom was the problem overcome. End of Book 1. Creation.